Let's start the session today. So, we'll go through input output classes today. And what I mean by input output classes is uh, there are times when you will have requirement that you want to read and write to and from something. Suppose, let's take an example like you want to write to a file or you want to read from a file. Suppose you have a file and that file contains some text contents and you want to read from that particular file. So, and there are times that you might want to write some content to a file. So in that case, you might need the help of this input output classes. And there are also requirements sometimes that you might need some input from the keyboard, or you might need to like send some data to the some particular drive, or you want to like transport some data over the network. So in that case you will need the help of this input output classes. So what I mean by input and output is basically input and output is like, suppose let's take an example like you have a hard drive or a floppy drive. So that drive basically contains some data, and you need to like read from the data, or you want to like write some data to that drive. Similarly, you have a monitor, so you want to like display some information on that monitor. So these are like examples of input and output operations. There might be another operation like file operations, like I've already discussed. Like file operations are basically like writing and reading from a file. So let's say you have a text file and that contains some information about your project, and you want to like read some documentation from that particular text file. So these things are supported by Java. These things are supported by the input output classes. So these libraries are present in the io package. So we'll see how basically we can perform some of these operations. So in this input and output classes, basically we have this input and output streams, then we have byte based streams. We'll go through this topic one by one. Then we have character based stream, then we have some file class, means this file class will contain some methods to perform some operation on the file. And then we have some readers and writers, how we can read from a file, how we can write through a file. So we'll go through this. Just see this diagram. So we have our program and we are using this input and output library. When we use this input and output library, this provides us input and output streams, and this input and output streams will help us to perform some operation from these things like hard drive, floppy drive, tape drive, network drive, memory, monitor, printer. There are also like file based operations. So the most important ones are the file handling things, because in Java generally you might need some requirement where you have to read contents from a file or write contents from a file. So that will be that is like the most important thing, like file operations. Whatever file operations are there, we'll need to like go through those and see how we can like read and write on a given file. So these are the input output operations that can be performed with the help of input and output streams. So see this slide, types of input and output streams. So we have gone through several collections as of now, like java.lang collection that contains like, that is the default java.lang package. So that package basically contains a lot of default libraries provided by Java. Then we went through that java.util collections, like your data structures, or like list, set, interface, list interface, maps, and their implementation. and stacks, dequeue, everything was contained in the util package. Now, whatever file handling operations we will perform, these are contained in the java.io package. So this IO is basically input output package. So let's see this. We have byte based stream and we have character based stream. So there are like two ways in which we will read and write data from different sources. By sources I mean like files, then we can think of images. So these are basically sources. So we have two streams, like byte based stream and then we have character based stream. So representation of data is basically 1 byte data in byte based stream, and representation of data is like representation unit is basically 2 bytes data. Means in when we talk about memory, means I'm just giving some idea. Means when we talk about memory, right, everything that is on the system has some storage or memory. Means even the files that you have on your phone or the images that you have on your mobile device, so that is of a that contains some storage on your phone, right, that occupies some storage on your phone. So in terms of that, byte is basically byte based stream means it's 1 byte of data, and when we talk of character based stream means when we will be like using character based stream, it the representation will be 2 bytes of data, and byte is one of the storage units in Java. So byte based stream basically takes like 1 byte of data, the representation unit is 1 byte, and character based stream is basically 2 bytes. And when we go for byte based stream and when we go for character based stream, so for when we want to like perform some operations on images or let's say executable code, then we will go for byte based stream. Let's say we have some image on our system and we want to like read that particular image, then we will go through byte based stream. And let's say we want to read and write files the text files from the text files, then we'll go through this character based stream. We'll see like what are the classes which are supported in byte based stream and character based stream in the as we go further. So see this byte based stream, also known as input stream and output stream. So when we use this byte based stream, we have libraries like input stream and output stream. And when we use this character based stream, we have like the reader and writer classes. So there are classes in Java in the io package like reader and writer classes, and there are different like classes which are the subclasses of reader and writer. There are like several libraries for reader and writer. We'll see some of them how we can like implement those. So see this diagram. We know that object is at the highest hierarchy. Object class is at the highest hierarchy. This we have known from the beginning. Like object class is at the highest hierarchy, and any subclasses that are there will be the child classes of this object class. So output stream and input stream, all these classes will basically extend from this object class. And in output stream and input stream, so we are talking about byte based streams. If you want to perform operations like reading an image, let's say example, so what are the ways in which we can perform? So we have output stream and we have like input stream, and there are like different classes which support this output stream and input stream. Means there are like file output stream, object output stream, filtered output stream, buffered output stream, data output stream. Means each has its own usage, but the most common ones are this buffered output stream and file output stream. And similarly, input stream will basically help you to read contents. It will help you to read contents. Output stream will help you to write contents to something. Input stream will help you to read contents from some particular source. So The input stream classes are basically file input stream, object input stream, filtered input stream, buffered input stream, data input stream. So this is a hierarchy. This is the hierarchy of byte-based streams. Basically, output stream will help you to write contents to a given source, and input stream will help you to read data from a given source. And these are the supporting classes that are that will help in performing output operations or input operations. Let's go through another slide. This is about character based streams. So if you want to basically perform file related operations, you can go through this character based streams. And by character based streams, these are also under this object class. So object class is again like the highest hierarchy, and we have writer and reader classes. So writer classes will basically help you to write to some particular destination, and reader classes will basically help you to read from some particular source. And the classes which we will see, like these are the classes which will help you to basically read and write. Like writer classes are basically implemented by this buffered writer, print writer, output stream writer, and file writer. And again, this reader classes will be basically implemented by these supporting classes like buffered reader, input stream reader, and file reader. So we'll see one by one, like what are the most important ones and what are like mostly used while we perform some operations. So let's see this class, how we basically create a file in Java. So these are basically contained in this java.io package. So okay, let me just go through a demo and that will basically give more clarity. Okay, let's say we create a package, and uh, let's name these packages uh, file operations. Let's say this is like file dot operations. So we'll see what are the operations basically which we can perform on this particular on a file, and how we can like read and write through a file. Let's create a class like file example, or let's say like file operations. Let me create a main method, and then let me try to create a file. See, when I type file, I basically get this java.io. So this tells that this particular class is coming from java.io package. So let me try to create a file. Let me name this file as abc.txt, and let me try to create this file. When I do this f dot create file, a create new file, so it will try to create a file. And see, when I do this, I'm getting some error. I'm getting some error. So this is like compile time error. So what the editor is telling me, that you need to handle some exception, because when you are dealing with files, basically it's kind of an input output operation, and there are chances that you might get some input output exceptions. So you need to handle those exceptions. So how do we handle the exceptions? We basically use try and catch block. So let's go ahead and try to follow this suggestion. We'll add the exception to this method signature. So see, we had understood two ways. Either we can like do this throws IO exception here, or what we can do, we can also write this piece of code in a try block, right? This is also we can do this as well. And when we do this, what we need to do we need to handle this exception using the IO exception class, because we are expecting something like input output exception might occur in this particular case. So we will use this IO exception. The alternative way is also like you can remove this try and catch block, and in your main method, what you can do in the method signature, you can write something like throws IO exception here, something like this. But let's go with the try and catch block here. So we'll see how basically we can. Let's try to perform some operation on the file. Let's say we want to check if the file is existing, and let's try to run this program. So what it's basically saying, that yeah, a file is created and the name is like abc.text, and see, a file is created here, right? At this location, some file is created. We had performed an operation and we are able to create a file. So let's write it down here. You're seeing this file got created, right? abc.txt. So we had provided the name of the file here. File f is equal to new file, and what you need to do, you need to provide the name of the file. You can also choose to provide some absolute path, means the destination of your system where you want to basically store this file. So for example, I have like given this abc.txt, so I've got this file created here. So this is the command for creating a new file. File dot means this object reference we can use, and we can create this new file like with the method create new file. So let's write down some comment like does file exist. Are you following this? Is it like difficult, or is it like okay that you are able to follow this? Anyone facing issues until now? Okay, so we can also check what like the current operation that we have performed. Like we can also get the length, and we can try to like see if the file readable or is the file writable. So there are certain things that we can check. We can also check, is it like a file or is it a directory. So let's see, is it a directory. Directory means basically a folder. F dot is directory. Let's try to run this now. See, it's saying that it's false because this is not a folder, this is basically a file. So directory means basically a folder, so this is not a directory, this is basically a file. And you can alternatively check, like is it a file, is it a directory. So there are like some operations that you can perform. So let's see this, is it a file. So there is some method for that, f dot is file. So the file that we created at line number 8, right, you can use this object reference. So you can use this reference to basically perform any operation on this. So let's see if this file is readable or not. Is the file, is file readable? So let's see, We'll go for f dot can read. So we are getting that yes, if you write some contents to this file, you can read the file. And similarly, we can check whether is the file writable. So there are methods to check this as well, like can write is a method which is basically contained in this file class, and you can perform different operations, like can write can help you to basically check if this file is writable. So yes, you can basically write contents on this file as well. So these are basically some of the basic operations that you can perform through a file class. Now let's say we want to read through a file. We want to read through a file and write to another file. Okay, let me try to close this text file. Let's say what we want to do is, let's say I will create some uh, read text and read and write text. So I've created a read and write text. So what I'm trying to do is, the aim of this or let's say the requirement is basically read from a file and write to another file. So you will be given a file which will contain some text, and you want to basically read the contents from a file, from that particular file, and you have to write to another file. Means you have to basically whatever content is in the file 1, you have to write it in a file 2. So it's like reading from one file and writing to some other file. Means we have some kind of like source and destination data that we want to like copy. So we'll read from a file and write to another file. So this is our objective. So how we'll do this? Let's see this. We'll create the main method, and then what we'll do is we'll create one file. We'll create one file at this location in this package. So let's create one file. Let's name this file as file1.txt. So let's write some content in this file. Hello, welcome to Java training. So we have some text written over this particular file, and what we want to do is we want to basically create another file, and this will be an empty file, and we'll see how we can write on this particular file. So we'll name this file as new file.txt, and now let's write our program. So what we'll do now is let's see, we'll use the file reader class, and see when I write this file reader, you can see that this class is basically coming from java.io package. So we'll go ahead and create this file reader, and let's create the object of this file reader, and we'll give the path of this first file. We'll give the path of this first file. So let's click over this and get the absolute path. So let me try to give the path of this file. So I have given the path of this file. See, when I do this, right, what it's saying, I'm getting some error. Why I'm getting some error? Because this is a file related operation. And when I use a file related operation, this is kind of like input output operation. So we might get some kind of exception, and which needs to be handled. So what we'll basically do, we'll try to add some it to some method signature, or what we can do, one way is what we can do is use the try block. So let's place this piece of code in the try block. And when I do this, what it will ask me, if I am using some try block, I need to handle the exception as well. And what I need to do, this is an input output exception, so I'll need to use a catch block to handle this exception. So this is our this is where I'm handling the exception, and let's see if there is any exception. We'll print the exception trace. So it will get more information about the exception when we basically write this e dot print stack trace. So we are reading through we are reading contents from this file1 dot txt, and what we want to do is we want to write to a file as well. So let's use this file writer class. We have one file writer class which will help us to write to that particular file. And file writer fw is equal to new file writer, and we will we will give the path of this file. We want to write some contents to this file. So let's give the path of this file here, and we are reading from this file, and this is an empty file, new file.txt. We want to write contents to that particular file. So what we'll basically do, we will use character based streams. We in the beginning I told you, right, that we will be using character based streams. So let's uh, let's one let's use one of the variables, and let's say this is initialized to 0. We have one variable where we want to see track the characters, and we want to see means it is basically like pointing to the file, and it's pointing to the index. Let's say h is at index 0. So what we want to basically check is the file containing some data at this particular index. So let's say we have some data at index 0. So I will be pointing to this particular index. So we want to basically see, we want to read contents from this file, and first we'll check if the file is still containing some data. So what we'll do, we'll use one for loop, we will use one while loop, and now what will I do is I is equal to fr dot read. So there is a read functionality. So what we are trying to do, this fr is basically the file reader reference. This is the reference of file reader class, and file reader is basically reading from file1 dot txt. So what I am trying to do now is I am reading through the file, and I need to like check if this is basically, if this is if this file is still containing some information. So we will continue to read until there is information. So what will I do, I'll do something like this. So we are trying to read fr dot read not equal to -1. So if there is some data, this will not give a value of -1, and suppose the data in the file is now over, means we do not have any further data. So in that case, this method will give us a value of -1, and at that point we know that we have like read through the file, we have read the entire content from that particular file, and then we want to basically stop our file reading and writing operation. So what we can do, we can now we can write to the particular write to the another file. So we have the object reference of file writer class. So what we'll do, fw dot write. So whatever character that we got from this file 1.txt, that we want to basically go ahead and write in the destination file. So let's write this down, fw dot write I. And after writing this after writing this information into the destination file, what we want to do is we want to close these input output streams or operations. So whenever you are performing any input output operations, right, you will always have to close these files. So you will have to basically close this reader and writer classes. You will have to, like, whenever you use like input output streams, you will have to close these output streams. Why? Because if you do not close these things, there are like issues due to that. Your program might run out of memory. You might see some errors like Java stack. There is like Java heap memory exception. Means your when you run your program, it basically occupies. It uses the CPU and RAM, right? It uses your processing capabilities of your system, and if you do not close these things, then your processing power and storage is basically used by the system. And at a time, if you are using a lot of these operations and you are not closing these file writers, readers, or input output streams, then you might get some memory issues. So we will always follow the practice of closing these things. So let's close this file writer reference. We will close the file reader reference as well. So fr dot close, fw dot close. So let's try to now run this program. Let's try to run this program. We'll see if we can write, if we can read these contents and write contents to this particular file. Let's try to run this program. Okay, so let's go to this file. So we have this content. Hello, welcome to Java training. So see, this data is now written to this new file.txt as well. So we have, what we have done now is, from this source file we have read the contents, and to this destination file we have written the contents. So this is like reading through a file and writing contents to another file. So this can be performed with the help of this file reader and file writer classes. So this is a simple example. What we have seen just now is we have created two files. One is the source file, file1.txt, which contains some data, and then we have some destination file, new file.txt. This destination file needs to be written with the contents of the source file, and we have two classes to do that. We have like file reader and file writer classes. So file reader basically reads contents from that particular file. So we provide the absolute path when we create the object, and when we create the object of file writer, we provide the absolute path of the uh, destination file. And what we are trying to do in this while loop, we are trying to read contents from this file 1, and that is why we are using the file reader reference, and we are using this method fr.read, and until and unless there is some content, we will write to the next file. So we are using the file reference, file writer reference to write, and at the end what we are trying to do, we are trying to close this file reader and file writer references. So this will need to close the resources, and this will uh, not cause any memory issues. So that is why we are basically closing this file writer and file reader classes. And in this entire scenario we need to handle this IO exception, because when we write any code related to file, there are chances that input and output exceptions might occur. So we need to handle these exceptions. And when I run this program, it basically whatever content was there in file 1 is returned to this new file.txt. So this was our objective here. So we are able to read from a file and write contents to another file. Now there are like another ways to do this as well. There are another ways to do this as well. So this was one of the methods. Let's say when you want to like improve some performance while reading through the files and writing to some other files, so you need to improve the performance. So in Java there are some classes like buffered reader and buffered writer. So that buffered reader and buffered writer classes, basically what they do is they improve the performance of file reading and file writing. So they create they create some internal buffer. So at the back end, what happens when you use the buffered reader and buffered writer, so internally some buffer is created, and when entire thing is read, it flushes that particular data all at once. So in that case, what happens when the character by character is buffered internally and it is flushed out at once, it basically improves the performance of file reading and writing. So when you are like reading, suppose in your project you have some requirement where there is like a lot of data and you are performing a lot of file operations, and means you are reading through lots of long files and you are like writing it to a lot of different files. So if there is like lot of intensive file operations, so you can use for the buffered reader and buffered writer. So we'll see how we can basically use buffered reader and buffered writer to read through some files. Let's see this example. Okay, let me create another Java class and let's name this as file reader and file reader example. And what will I try to do now is I'll try to create a main method and I will try to use the buffered reader. So initially we need to like create one file reader object. So we'll create one file reader object, and what will we do is basically we will provide the path of the file we need to read from. So let's say I want to read from this file only. So let me try to copy this path. I want to read from file 1.txt. Okay, sorry, I need to provide it in quotes. And now I will, as expected, I will get some exception here. So I'll need to use the try and catch block. I'll need to use the try and catch block. So we'll place this code in the try block, and again we will use input output exception. We'll print out the stack trace e dot print stack trace. And now what I will do, I'll try to create a instance of buffered reader. So I want to use the buffering capability of buffered reader such that it is flushed all out once. So you will not see any difference in the output or as such anything, but internally the performance is improved. So I'll create an object of buffered reader, say buffered reader br is equal to new buffered reader, and in this buffered reader I need to basically pass the reference of this file reader. So let's pass the reference of this file reader here. See, when I do this, right, candidates for new buffered reader are, I'm getting some error because this is expecting an instance of file reader. So let's pass this fr here. Then the error goes away, and let's try to perform some operation. So now we will use this br object reference to perform some operation. We are using this buffered reader capability of input output library. So let's try to read one entire line. What we'll try to do is br dot read line. So this read line will try to read the line, and we will again use a while loop to check if, when we are trying to read a line, if we are getting a null value. Null value means that there is no content. So we'll check like s dot not equal to null. If it is not equal to null, what we'll try to do, we will try to print out this. We will try to print out this, and again we will perform a read line operation. Why? Because we will try to read until and unless there is content. We will try to read until and unless there is content. So this is like reading one line and check. Initially we are reading one line and we are trying to check if there is some content or not. If there is content, we are writing it out, and again we are again reading, like if there is still content left. So this, if there is some content, then this while loop will run again, because this s will contain some data. So if this is not null, we will again print it, and at some point, suppose like the entire content is read through. If the entire content is read through, then what we'll do is we will basically uh, will exit from this while loop. At some point, this s will be null when the entire content is read. So at that point, the loop will terminate and we will come out of the loop. So let's try to see if we are able to perform our objective. Let's try to close this file reader. Let me try to run this program. See, we are able to read through that particular file and write it on our console or terminal. So we are able to get this output. So you did not see anything different, but internally the buffer capability of this buffered reader was utilized, and it helps to perform better performance output. Means you will realize this when you like use a lot of like intensive data, when you have something like uh, let's say 1,000 pages or 100 pages data, and then you will like basically realize the difference. So as of now, it's like buffered reader can be used to improve the performance when you want to like read and write through a file. So you can use this buffered reader uh, buffered reader library when you want to basically perform better performance while using file input and output operations. So let's see another thing. We'll try to again use file writer, and we'll try to use this buffered writer. So this was about reading from a file, and now what we want to do is we will try to write something to the file, and let's try to create another file. Okay, let's name this as file2.txt. So we are trying to write to this particular file, and we will create another file writer example, and we will try to use buffered writer in this case. So we have seen the usage of buffered reader. Similarly, we will see the usage of buffered writer. So reader classes are basically to read, writer classes are basically to write to some destination. So what we'll do now is we will try to create one file reader writer object. Let's name this as fw and file writer, and let's try to copy this path. Okay, and again we will get this error. So let's try to place this code in the try block, and let's try to handle the exception using the catch block. Let's try to print the stack trace here, and now we will create the object of buffered writer. So let's create the object of buffered writer. All these classes are basically in the io.package. And let's pass the reference of file writer. Similarly, we did this in the previous example as well, right? So this is just like using the writer classes. Previous class, in the previous example, we used file reader and buffered reader. Now we are using file writer and buffered writer. So let's try to do this, and now what we'll try to do, let's try to create a new line, br.new line, and we will try to write something. And there is a method like br.write, and what we'll do, we'll write some content. Let's write some content. So let's say hello, let's study file handling operations. And what we'll do, we will flush out the entire data all at once to this particular file. Let's use this method fr.flush. So once you use this method br.write and br.flush, so it will flush out the entire contents all at once to this particular file. And once we are done with this, what we'll again do, we will again close this writer and writer classes. So let's do this br.close, and let's do this fw.close. Let's try to run this program. Okay, let's try to go and see in this file2.txt if we got some content. See, we got some content. Hello, let's study file handling operations. So this is about like writing and reading from a file. So this time we have like seen it through the buffered reader and buffered writer. So whenever you want to like improve the performance of file reader and file writers, so you will use it along with buffered reader and buffered writer. So file intensive operations, if there are like too much of file intensive operations, file reading and file writing, so you can go for buffered reader and buffered writer. So let's go to the slides. So we have covered the necessary things which we wanted to cover in input and output classes. We have seen,
Pritam, can I ask a question, please?
yes,
On the editor,
yes,
one step back, please, on the editor. On the
yeah, I think you should be able to see my editor.
editor, yes.
Yes,
Uh, I think it is on file one text. My question is, you are leaving a line between.
where
For
exactly?
instance,
In
yeah.
file 2.txt?
Can you click on file operations?
Yes.
File operation. Look, here is my question. Between line 5 and line 6, you left one line empty. Is it for a reason or just
No, this is for
why?
like, this is nothing. This is like you can even like remove this. This does not like uh, cause anything. This is just for
Okay, okay.
readability
You are
purpose. Readability purpose. See,
okay,
these are like
okay,
importing packages, right? Here I am importing packages, and here I have started the class. I can like remove this line. This does not impact anything, but for readability purpose, I just provide one line like this is like importing the package, and this is like starting from the file. So this is like nothing to do. You can like leave any more lines, but basically
okay.
for code readability I've like given one line. This is nothing else.
I understand. And yeah, clear. You are clear.
Okay.
But another question,
Okay.
when you are writing the paths,
When I'm writing.
uh, the path, the uh,
Okay.
could you show me the path you were writing the paths, the long line path?
Okay, I was writing this path, right?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah.
Uh, did you copy and paste, or how do you get it? This long line.
Yeah. If I go and hover over this file, right, and I try to copy this path, right, there's an option like you can copy this path. So
Okay,
you go over this and try to click on this absolute path, so you will be able to copy the path, and then you will be able to, you just copy paste that particular path here. You got it how I got
great,
the absolute path, right?
great, great. Thank you, thank you.
Okay. Okay, so this was about the input and output classes. We have seen how we can basically create a file and we can perform some operations on this, and we were able to check if this file is readable, writable, if this file exists, if it is a file, is a directory or not. So there were certain operations which we checked on the file, and then after this we used the character stream to read and write from a file. We have seen this example, and then what we did was we basically used buffered reader and buffered writer classes to improve the performance of input and output operations. So this buffered reader and buffered writer can help you improve the performance of your file handling operations, because they use internally some buffer and they flush out the data all at once. So you can use buffered reader and buffered writer classes when you have like lot of data intensive, file intensive operations. So we are done with like input output module. Now we'll see another module, that is generics in Java. So what is the basic need of generics in Java? So generics are basically a facility of generic programming that were added to the Java programming in JDK 5. So now we are using this JDK 8, right? So before JDK 5, there was no concept of Java generics. So what generic brings to the picture, right? Generic brings to the picture is you are able to handle a lot of data types using a single program. Suppose you want to perform some operations and you want to use like different data types. So to your particular method, you need to pass like that significant the same type of data. Suppose you want to like add two numbers. Suppose you want to add two numbers and you want to use you want to add two integer numbers. So what do? You create a method like some method and you pass two parameters and those parameters have to be integers, right? Those parameters have to be integers. Now, what you want to do, you want to perform some operations on some float values or some double values, like some decimal values, which contain some uh, decimal after the number. So, in that case, you want to provide the parameters data type as double or float, but you have to like create different method again and again you have to basically provide different parameters. But with the introduction of generics in Java, the programmers are able to handle many data types. Means with a single method and single example or a single program, you can handle all the different data types. So this is an effective strategy that enhances the readability, maintainability, and reusability of the code. So what you are trying to do, you are trying to use the same code to handle a lot of data types. Means your code is being reused. Means when I showed you some programs like in method overloading, what we did was we're trying to perform some addition on different parameters, right? Means we were trying to use a method when we were trying to add two integers, and then the overloaded method was used to like perform some operations on double values. So we have to like create separate methods in such a case. But what we want to do, we want to like reuse the same code, we want to use the same method to handle different data types. So what we'll do in that case is we will try to uh, uh, utilize Java generics, and we'll see what is the benefit of generic programming in Java. So this helps to reuse the code. So one of the advantages is code reusability. So generic programming enables code to be written once and used for a variety of data types, cutting down on the amount of code that needs to be produced. The code is now easier to maintain and more reusable. So it is about code reusability. Once you write the code, you can use it for a lot of data types. Now next usage is type safety. So generics offer compile time safety, which helps to catch problems at the time of coding rather than after they have been executed. So during compile time only you will be able to get any errors if you are using Java generics. And by doing this, the code becomes more robust and the possibility of production errors is decreased. So if you are getting any error at the compile time, so your editor will only show you that you have got this compile time error, and after that you will be able to fix it then and there, and there is like a minimal possibility of errors. So your errors are reduced at the compile time itself. And also generics helps you like to improve readability. So by readability I mean that generics will improve readability by making it explicit which data type a class or method is meant to operate on, and developers will have an easier time understanding the code as a result, which lowers the risk of mistake. So readability is also very much improved when you use Java generics. So you don't have to like write a lot of methods for performing the same operation on different data types. So this is basically the advantage of generics. So now let's see how we can basically create a generic program and try to use it for a different data types. So let me close all this. Let me try to create a new package com.java.training dot dot generics, and what we'll try to do, we'll try to like create one class and try to use it for a different data. Let's say I'm creating one class and I'll try to use it for different data types. Let me try to explain that thing. Let's create one class like generic test. Let's try to create a class named generic test. And what we need to basically do, earlier what we used to do is when we went to create any data members, we used to create something like private string name, something like this, right? Now what will we do is we'll try to create something like a generic. So what we can do, we need to pass something at the class definition itself. So when we creates create our class, like right, public class name, and after this class name we need to provide some parameter here. So let's name it as t, and when I do this I can, so this is of a generic type. This T is for a generic type. So what I mean by generic type, this T can be a string, this T can be a double value, this T can be an integer, T can be anything. So we are trying to use this as a generic data type. Generic means common data type. It can be anything. So let's try to create one. Let's try to create a data member here. If you want to create another uh, generic data, so let's try to define something else. Let's provide a comma and try to provide another generic data type, and we can name it as uobj2. So let's try to do this, and let's try to create one parameterized constructor. Let's go to our editor and let's try to generate one constructor. Let's generate the constructor with both these parameters. So we are able to generate our constructor, and what we want to do is we want to print out this. Let's write one method to print out this: public void display, and in this method what we'll basically do, we'll try to print out these objects. Let's try to print out this obj1, obj2. Now what will we do is we will try to create a main method here. Let's try to create a main method, and let's try to create the object of this generic class. Whenever we want to like provide some data to our data members, so what we basically do, we first create a parameterized constructor, we initialize that, and then at the time of object creation we pass some values. So whenever we create an object and pass some values, this constructor is called and these data members are initialized. So let's try to do this. Let's try to create the object of this, and let's try to pass some data. Like let's suppose the first parameter that I want to pass is string, and the second parameter is, let's say, it is an integer, and let's provide some reference variable, and then let's we need to pass those values in this. uh, so initially when you created some object, right, you remember there was something like test t is equal to new test, and then what you want to do is you want to pass some value, let's say John. You created some object like this, right? So now what we are trying to do is we are trying to introduce one angular braces here, and this angular braces we want to pass, let's say we have two parameters, so we want to provide the data type, any data type we can provide. So let's remove this. So similarly I'm doing that, and here I need to provide values to the two parameters. So if the first parameter is string, so we will provide some value to this, and let's say I provide some, let's say this integer is some integer, so let's pass this value. And now that our generic object is created, the constructor is called, and the data members are initialized. Let's try to use this reference object reference to display the data. Let's try to display the data. Let's say obj dot display. Let me try to run this program. See, we are able to run the program and we are able to get the values. Like we are able to get it like Andrew and 10. Now let's modify this one. Let's try to modify this. We'll use some different data this time. Now what will we do? Let's name this as obj2, and let's say we want to use a double value. And similarly, if you are using a double value, see, this is like showing me compile time error. So this is like checking errors at the compile time itself. So this is also one benefit that generic programming helps me to get the errors at the compile time. So if our data type is double, what we want to do is we want to provide some double value. So double value is, let's say, some decimal value. Let's say 10.5. See, the error went away, right? And now if I run my program, I would be okay. I need to use obj2.display. Let me try to separate out some, right? And then let's try to run this. See, this time we are able to print one double value and one integer value. So did you understand the benefit of this? So we are trying to use a same program for handling different data types. With the single object creation, we can handle like string and any data like integer data, and we can like also handle decimal values, integer values. Again, if you want to like create something as like object 3, let's go for this. Let's create this as obj3, and let's name this as double and double. And again you will, this will tell that your object is basically requiring double and double values, but you are providing one double and integer. So it's, the editor will basically show you the error at the compile time, and it will also provide you the suggestion how to fix that. So what you can do, you can provide one double value here as well. So let's say okay, 50.5, and let's try to run this now. Let's try to run this. So with the help of a single program, you can basically handle a lot of data types. See, we are able to print both the values as double now. In the first example, we were able to print string and integer. Next example, we are able to print double and integer, and now again double and double. In the classes that we had seen until now, when we were using a constructor, we were specifying the data type here itself at the time of instance variable creation. So if we like use that, if we like specify that is our id is an integer or the name is a string, and we create such data members here itself, then in the object creation you have to basically pass only the integer and string. So you cannot use that particular object to use to provide some generic value. But in this program, basically you see that you have passed two generic data types here, and you have initialized those generic data types in this constructor, and you are printing it out here. And while the object creation, you can try to decide what data type should be contained in this two generic data types. So let's say I've created like three objects, and once I'm using string and integer, once I'm using double and integer, and then again double and double, and then I'm trying to print that out. So once I do that, I'm able to use the same method and the same program to handle different data types. So this is the beauty of generic programming. So you can think of scenarios like if you are performing similar operations, like if you are performing like the same operation for different data types, then you can create a program such as this, and you can go for the implementation. So this is the beauty of generic programming. With a simple program and a simple method, you can handle a lot of data types. Okay, we'll see another example. Everyone understood this, or anyone has any confusion? Okay, one more thing. While we were creating the collection classes, right? Collection classes are also an example of generic classes. So let me try to show you the collection framework examples that we took. So let's see one of the examples, like array list demo. See, when we used to create a list on array list, right? So at the runtime, we can try to create a list of integers, we can try to create a list of strings, we can try to create a list of double values. So the collection classes that are provided by the java.util package, they are a classic example of generics in Java. So you can create a list of integers, you can create a list of strings, you can create a list of custom objects, right? Like list of employee. So you can create a list of students. So this is a classic example of Java generics. You have already used Java generics when you were using the collection classes, but you were not aware of that. But now this class is a custom generic exception class. Sorry, custom generic example class means you are creating a class which is handling generic data types, and this is a custom class, a user defined class that is using generic data type. When we were using collection, that was some built-in utility provided by the util package, and those were also using generic data types. So we had already seen that in the collection framework. We'll use this Java generics to create a class which will basically help us to add two numbers. And when I want to add two numbers, I want to like add any type of numbers. Let's say I want to add integer numbers. Let's say I want to add decimal numbers. So I want to use the same method to handle this. So let's see how we can perform this operation. Let's say we will create one class, add numbers, and this class we need to provide our generic data type. And in this generic data type, we want to add the numbers. We want to add the numbers. You can also do something like t extends numbers. So if you are, let's say, if someone provides a string while adding, right? So that will be an error. You don't want to add a string. Basically, you want to provide addition of some numbers, be it like decimal numbers, be it like integer numbers or whole numbers. So in that case you can do something like extends number. So when you do this extends number, this is like limiting that you have to provide any integer, any decimal, or any negative number. You can provide those things. So what you will do now is, let's try to create two numbers now. Let's try to create two data members of the same type. Private t, let's name it as num1, then private t, let's name this as num2, and let's try to initialize these data members using the parameterized constructor. So we have initialized this data members using our parameterized constructor. So now we will create one sum method. We will create one sum method or add method. And so this will, the return type of this will also be generic. Suppose we are adding integers, this t will be integer. So let's use this. Let's create a method where this t will be returned, and this t means if we are adding two integers, this t will be integer. If we are adding two double numbers, this t will be a double value. So let's say we want to handle those cases. Now let's say if our number 1 and number 2 is an integer, and so what we can do is, there is some method in Java which will help you to check if it is an integer or if it is a double. So let's say if num1 instance of integer. So this method, this condition will basically help you to check if your number 1 is integer. If your number 1 is integer, and so what you can do, if number 1 is integer, in that case you want to return an integer value. So let's say I will return, you can write something like num1 dot int value plus num2 dot int value. You can do something like this. Now you'll get some error. What it is saying, that it requires a t type. So you need to basically typecast this. You need to typecast this. And now you are typecasting this. You also need to typecast this. So let's say we are making a sum of this, and we are first typecasting this to an integer, and then this requires a t type. This will require a t type. If I remove this, I will still get an error. What it will say is, you have provided an integer, you need to provide a t. So when you get some errors such as like that, you need to provide the t type. This is basically like typecasting. This is basically like typecasting. Now what I want to do, let's say I want to handle double values. So we'll write one else if condition. Let's say we'll again check whether the number one is double. So we can use if num instance of, basically it will help us check whether this particular number is an instance of double, means it is like type checking if it is double. So what we'll basically do in this case, we'll again do num1 dot double value plus num2 dot double value, and then we will put this in a bracket, and first we will typecast this with a double, and then still we'll get an error that you have provided double but we need a T type. So again we will typecast this with a T. Now let's say we are providing something like in the else condition, if these both conditions are false, if it is not even integer, if it is not even double, then what we do, and we don't want to handle any other cases, then we can basically return a null. So let's try to perform this. Let's try to create some data and try to call this method. So let's create our main method, and in this main method we will create the object of this add numbers class, and let's say first time we want to add the integers. So here I am passing the data type as integer. Let's say addition of integers, and now what I need to do, okay, I need to add the numbers, and here I need to pass the integer values. Since I have created a method to handle the sum of two integer values, so I need to pass any integers. Let's say I'm passing one integer and one double, so I'm getting an error as there itself. So it's expecting two integer values, so I need to pass two integer values. Now what I want to do is I want to print out the I want to basically print out the sum of these two integer values. So let's say we will call our add method. So let's try to run this program and see the output. 7. Let's say sum is 7. Now at the same time what we are trying to do, let's try to use this to add to double numbers. Let's say we want to add some double numbers. Now what will we do is we can pass some double values here. Now let's say we pass some double values. Oh, I need to change this. I need to change this to double. So now that we are passing a double value, we have we are trying to pass it for a double value. I need to pass two double values. Now let's say I have to use addition of double numbers here. So sum is equal to, let's separate this out by a line. So this time we are adding two double numbers. So see the output, sum is equal to 8.0. So did you understand the objective of this class? See, our objective was to basically write a generic class which basically helps you to add two numbers, and those numbers can be of any data type. Means you want to handle different data types in a same program. So basically what I did, I created one generic data type, and since I did not want to use like strings to add something, because those have to be number. So this generic data type extends number. You can do something like this. So you are limiting that you want to add any numbers, and you created two data members, num1 and num2. After that, you basically initialize these data members using your parameterized constructor, and then you have created this method, add method, which will basically check if it is an integer, if you are trying to perform the addition of integers, that you can check like with the help of this method. Instance of will basically give you the type. So we will check if num1 is instance of integer, so we will perform the addition of integers, and that you can do using this num1 dot int value, num2 dot int value. And you need to perform typecasting to an integer first, and since we are returning a generic data type t, we will return a t. And similarly, if you want to handle the case for double, you can check num1 instance of double, and similarly you can do num1 dot double value plus num2 dot double value. And since this is a double value, you need to typecast to double and then again typecast to t. And then in this main method, I have created the objects. I've created two objects, one for handling integers where I passed the integer data type, and in the other example I passed the double data type. And similarly, when I'm using it for integers, I need to pass two integer values, and here I need to pass two double values, and then we are calling the add method. We are basically calling the add method, and when I'm running this, it's able to handle both the data types like integers as well and double values as well. Is this program clear to everyone? The add numbers program, we are able to handle any data type here. Does anyone have any query here? Okay, if no one has any queries, then we'll stop the class for today. We'll uh, proceed to the next module in the next class. So this was about Java generics. So we covered Java generics today, and we also covered input output classes. So we'll proceed to the next module in the next class. Thank you everyone.